yes, this really happened. And some of you who know my story have heard this before. What you might not know is the inciting incident which led to the call to my mother. So we'd gone to Six Flags on a church trip a few weeks before this. More about the church later. So I remember having a very little bit of spending money at Six Flags, and I remember going into the gift shop, and the second I walked into the very crowded gift shop at Six Flags, I saw this handheld fan. And the second I saw this handheld fan, I knew I had to have it. It had peacocks on it. It was fabulous. And what you should know about this is I had seen Gone with the Wind a few weeks before that. And for those of you who don't know, the main character of Gone with the Wind, the heroine of Gone with the Wind, Scarlett O'Hara, famously fans herself with a handheld fan in a very sort of glamorous way. And so I'm sitting in third grade fanning myself, just fanning away, feeling very Scarlett O'Hara, feeling very Gone with the Wind, fabulous. And Miss Ridgway looks at me and she says, "Come here and bring that thing with you." And then she marches me down the hall to Miss Fairley's classroom and she says to me, "Show her what you were doing with that thing." And I'm like, "Yeah." I start fanning myself, my invisible hair blowing in the wind. She's like, "Okay, stop. Now go back to class." And then my mother got the call. And so I remember sitting in the therapist's office, and the therapist asked me if I knew the difference between a boy and a girl. And in my infinite wisdom as a third grader, because third graders are so wise, right? I said, "There is no difference." This was third grade. This was years before Judith Butler and any gender theory. But the way I reasoned in my mind at the time is that everyone was telling me that I was a boy, but I knew in my heart, in my soul, in my spirit that I was really a girl. So I reasoned that there must not be any difference. And I didn't know how to really explain it beyond that. Now as a kid, I watched a lot of television. I still do. Now I'm on TV too. It's research. So on television, I had heard about this thing called doctor-patient privilege, and so I had assumed that everything I said to the therapist was between me and the therapist, but apparently third graders do not have doctor-patient privilege. And so everything I said to the therapist, my mother found out about it. My mother yelled at me. She said, "You're a boy, and boys are this, and girls are this, and you can't act this way." And when my mother would yell, the entire house would shake. And it was another moment in my childhood where I was being shamed about my gender, not only by the other kids, but now by my teacher, by a therapist, and of course by my mother. Now, I continued to go to the therapist, and eventually there was talk about injecting me with testosterone to make me more masculine. And lucky for me, a red flag went up from my mother. Something didn't seem quite right about injecting her third grader with testosterone to make them more masculine. So we discontinued the therapy, but the damage was done. More shame. So we were members of Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church. Does anyone know the AME Church here? Yeah? Oh yeah. The AME Church, or the African Methodist Episcopal Church, for those of you who don't know, is the oldest all-black denomination in this country. It was started in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania by a guy named Richard Allen and some of his colleagues in Philadelphia at the time. They were frustrated with the ways in which black parishioners were being treated in the Methodist Church, so they started their own church. And if you ever do a tour of Philly, you can see the very first AME Church. We call her Mother Bethel, and I got to go to Mother Bethel a couple of years ago with my mom. But we were members of Bethel AME Church in Mobile, Alabama, and going to church every single Sunday was pretty much mandatory. And there were a lot of wonderful things for me about the church, the spirituality that I carry with me to this day. I learned in the AME church that I grew up in. Even though I don't subscribe to organized religion as an adult, I consider myself a very spiritual person. And church was wonderful for me too because it presented yet another performance opportunity. I loved to dance as a kid, and I loved to perform. And so I was an usher in the church. I sang in the choir, and I was always one of those kids getting up and making speeches. So apparently not much has changed. The more things change, the more they stay the same. This is a brief digression, but the really cool thing about having an identical twin brother is that my brother has obviously been with me through my whole life, from the womb. And my brother says to me that I am the same person that I've always been. I'm just more myself now. Brief digression. So, church, unfortunately, though, was another place where I learned that who I was authentically was not only something to be ashamed of, but something that was a sin, that was blasphemy, and meant I would go to hell. So in 6th grade, I started to go through puberty, and this was a really difficult time for me in my childhood. I remember distinctly saying to myself that I didn't want to grow up and turn into a man, that idea of that was terrifying to me, but puberty happened anyway, and as puberty was happening, I realized that I was attracted exclusively to boys, and everyone was telling me that I was a boy, and I was like, okay, whatever. And I was attracted to other boys, and I learned in church that this was a sin, and so this was another thing that I internalized a tremendous amount of shame about. And also in 6th grade, another really deeply traumatizing moment happened in my childhood, and it happened when my grandmother passed away. My grandmother was a remarkable woman. Her name was Laverne Cox, but we called her Madea, sort of like that Tyler Perry character, but not really, not at all, actually. But Madea, as many of you know, is short for mother.